Welcome to An Uncommon Conversation, brought to you by the Kauffman Foundation. This episode is the second in a series of frank, personal conversations between women in the entrepreneurship space who discuss equity and economic engagement through the lens of their personal and professional experiences. In this installment, we bring together Naomi Hirabayashi, the co-founder of Shine, and Desiree Vargas Wrigley, the executive director of TechRise and founder of Parachute. The women share how they've built their businesses, navigated bias around their identities, and earned success from resiliency, working with allies, and acting as allies for others. They candidly address the barriers to raising capital and the impact inequities, such as the gender wage gap, have on the earnings and innovative potential of women.
Desiree, do you want to start?
Sure. I don't even know where to start, but I was actually working at the Kauffman Foundation when I got my first idea for a business. And that was one of the first crowdfunding platforms in the world called Give Forward. So I moved to Chicago and built that to $200 million in transactions and about 30 million uniques a year. So it got to be a pretty big site.
Amazing.
And then had a real kind of like, I think, woman founder moment and doubted myself and thought maybe a seasoned operator would be able to do a better job and grow it faster. So I stepped into a strategy role. That was not a good call at all. And then I ended up building my second company, Parachute, also in Chicago. And it is a kids activity marketplace. So we help busy moms find enrichment activities for their children, and at the same time help support small businesses who are looking for an efficient and easy way to find their ideal families and customers.
Congrats on everything you've built. And the doubting yourself moment, and it turns out like you were the best person for the job, no doubt, is very real. So I would love to hear more about that. I'm Naomi. I am the co-founder at Shine. Shine is on a mission to make taking care of your mental, emotional health easier, more representative, and more inclusive. And myself and my business partner, Mar, who's actually out on maternity leave right now with her beautiful new daughter, our path to entrepreneurship came from really just our own kind of frustration and feeling very much overlooked in the well-being industry, both as women of color, and feeling like in a lot of ways it's gotten better. But when we started Shine in 2016, feeling like there was an absence in the wellness world or in the mental health world to talk about and get support for taking care of your mental and emotional health in a way that was much more preventative, daily, and conversational. So fast forward to where we are now 5 years later. So we actually just celebrated our 5-year milestone at Shine. We're in 189 countries. We were just named Best of 2020 by Apple for the work that we did for more inclusive mental health, particularly on the backdrop of this last year. And I'm so excited to like have this conversation. This was like one of those conversations I was really excited about. I think both being female founders, is an underrepresented experience in the space, and that's changing, but there's still so much change that needs to happen. And then I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and just navigating being a co-founder and a mother, and all of the your company is your child as well. So it's like it's just a very unique experience, and I'm always eager to hear from just other women in the journey.
Well, I'm also a mother. My kids are 9 and about to turn 7, and then I'm also a stepmom to a 15-year-old. So I'm a few years ahead of you, but I'm curious, as a woman and entrepreneur, kind of how you navigated this last year with a 2.5-year-old, then a 1.5-year-old. That is really tough.
Well, it's so interesting because I even look at pictures. I'm sure everybody's doing this to some degree, of like last March feels like, a lifetime ago, a world ago, all the things. And she was still a baby in so many ways then, and I think probably for a lot of mothers, it's like, it's gone through different stages. The first 3 months of the pandemic were incredibly hard because we didn't have, with a qualifier of like hard in comparison and keeping perspective on all of it. But we didn't have any daycare, we didn't have any childcare coverage. And that, on top of building a business and a lot going on in the world and in our country, that, deeply impacted our community, was just a hard time to navigate. And I think I tried to talk very kindly to myself about what I was able to get done, because it was like jumping between meetings and trying to give her a bath and feed her, and then being like, oh, she's watching 8 hours of television today. That's just what today looks like, because those are the only options that we have. And then also I had an ectopic pregnancy last year, and so there was a lot happening, and I think there's a version of, everybody has some version of that. There's been so much grief and loss in this last year, and it takes a lot of different ways and shapes and forms. So how that impacts me today is like, I think just the resilience of all of us, and I think particularly as women who have like had to hold so many things together at once, to give myself space that like some days look a little different in terms of productivity. Feeling appreciation for the progress that we have made, like seeing her in school and social and getting curriculums and all of that. And then like my health as a woman, not taking that for granted. But yeah, what about you? I mean, that's, having a teenager and, all kids in school age, like that's a lot to manage.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was really, really tough.
Yeah.
Specifically for me and the business that Parachute is in, we are the last minute kids activity marketplace. So, think like drop into a ballet class to see if it's something that you want to be doing long term. And so I suddenly found myself without any inventory to be selling. And even, yes, the transition to online was a possibility, but there were so many competitors that were so far ahead of us in the space, and we didn't know how long it was going to last. It didn't feel like the right move at the right time for us, just given the business model. And so we did eventually we did it pretty quickly, but to allow for online class bookings through the platform. Yeah. But it was, personally such a hard place to be in, because Parachute hit this really amazing momentum at the very beginning of 2020. We changed our business model from being like a class pass for kids to being more like Expedia. And so we went from about 1,500 locations on the platform to 6,000 in 5 weeks. And so it felt like we were, as a 4-year-old company at that point, we were finally starting to hit our stride. And it had been a kind of a slog. I'm sure you've experienced this fundraising, but when you're building a business that's unfamiliar, like the problem is unfamiliar to a predominantly white, rich male investor pool, it just takes a lot longer to get the traction metrics that you need to get to the next level. Yeah. And so most men, unfortunately, had never spent 3 hours looking for floor hockey for a 7-year-old. So they didn't really understand what we were solving. And I did raise money. I mean, I raised $4 million. So it's not like I didn't raise anything, but compared to, thank you. But compared to like the $20 million, the money in the market, other marketplaces that are solving less important problems, I think, it felt like it was not enough. So, on the one side, I felt like, okay, we have this business model that's going to work. And me as a founder, I felt really validated by the changes that we'd made. And then of course, this like outside of our control circumstances happened, but it didn't just affect me and my 12 person team. It was, the now 6,000 locations that are predominantly run by women and people of color for enriching our children. All of them we all got hit with the same problem at the same time. And that time period between when everything shut down and when PPP opened up was tremendously stressful for us as a startup and, our partners. Yeah. And we saw, the level of work that fell on mothers' shoulders, because most of those business owners are also mothers. It was just kind of unmanageable. Sorry. No. My husband on my phone. It was an unmanageable amount of work. And at the same time, my youngest was in kindergarten and so not yet reading. And so e-learning became this incredible burden. And my husband's a police officer, so he can't be home to help. Right. And so I really struggled, and I know I wasn't alone. There were a lot of women who were going through something similar in terms of how do I balance what is now a diminishing career or business opportunity. At the same time, I have all of these, personal demands and this like general fear of like, what happens if I get sick? What happens if I'm not here with my kids? Right. And so many of my friends moved to part-time or removed themselves from the workforce. And, these are high earning women that were, suddenly taking themselves off the path. And it just feels like we have lost a decade and a half of progress as women, professionally, and also the stay-at-home moms who are thinking about going back that now feel like that's completely off the table, or that their skill sets are that much farther behind now because of all of the acceleration that we had technically and digitally over the last year. So we have a lot of work to do as a society, I think, to fix things for women.
And knowing that we were already behind, there's already inequity, so much inequity.
I know a friend of mine
Yeah.
wrote this book, and she's borrowing the data, but I didn't realize that the gender pay gap is $564 billion a year. And I mean, I knew it was big, but like when you talk about it in terms of 18 cents on the dollar or whatever, you're like, oh, well, it's 18 cents. But when you amplify that to the population or magnify it, that's the equivalent of 1/4 of the first stimulus bill. So every 4 years, women are getting the full impact of the stimulus bill negated against our like earning potential. It's insane. So what can we do about it?
I know. And I wanted to give a shout out to Reshma, who was the former founder. She just transitioned. She was the founder of Girls Who Code. She's been doing a lot of work around this initiative called the Marshall's Plan for Moms, and it's around creating essentially like stimulus packages specifically for motherhood, and recognizing exactly, as you said so well, we were already behind, and I didn't realize the cumulative number of what that 18 cents represents, which is,
staggering.
Just staggering. And then this last year happened, right? And so much of that is obviously outside of our control, but I think it reflects what happens, which is, women are predominantly, we're obviously broad strokes, general terms, like caretaking more. And the choice of, what do you do? Do you, having to like make that choice between your kids' education and in your salary and your career. And yeah, I don't know what we do about it, but I definitely think talking about it and just raising the level of awareness around what the problem is.
Yeah.
And I think as women, I don't know, I'd be curious, like Desiree, for you, it's like also just hits home in that there's so many different situations that we've endured in fundraising or as female founders, and, very underrepresented group in a predominantly white male system, that like you felt those inequities, it's like that number as a representation has been felt in meetings or times that you've been, undervalued or overlooked. And we just have a lot of work to do.
There's so many examples, I think, of that in my career, and I'm sure you have it too, but from, when I was leaving Give Forward because I couldn't watch this other person kind of sink this baby that I had built.
Yeah.
The severance that I was offered was, I started the company first. I brought in a male co-founder. My severance was less than what they offered my male co-founder. And it was, I just couldn't believe that they would even have the gall to do it. And then similarly, when fundraising, yes, we raised money from a lot of the same firms that some of, cool peers raised from, but our check sizes were a third of what they got, and the valuation reflected that, even though our revenue and momentum was the same or better. And it's so hard as a woman to find that out after and feel like you were, betrayed in this meeting that seemed like a collaborative partnership, but really probably just checking the box in some ways for them to have some diversity in their portfolio. And it's something that I'm actually working on now. I'm now running an initiative called Tech Rise, which is a $5 million friends and family round of funding for Black and Latinx founders in Chicago. And it's non-dilutive grants, and we do 30 pitch competitions a year, and that's how we distribute the funds. So it's pretty democratized. We invite VCs and angels from across the country to come in. We really are trying to change that narrative, at least locally. And we're very, very focused too on the intersectionality of, of women, trans, non-binary with the Black and Latinx communities, because Black women only get 0.27% of venture funding, and Latina women get 0.37. And women as a whole get 2.4, but it's an embarrassing sum as a country that is supposed to be more progressive. So.
That is amazing that you're doing that. And I love to hear about, for Mara and myself, Mara was the first in her family to go to college. I went to community colleges, ended up graduating from Reform University, but we didn't necessarily have the track that was the typical track. And something that we were so thankful for is the democratized open access forums for getting into what is a very exclusive industry. And a shout out to Harlem Capital is actually one of our investors on our most recent round. If you go to their website, for anyone that's listening, especially if you're an investor, they have such a great example of how to do exactly what you're doing, because they want to diversify the face of entrepreneurship. Here's what we look for, send us your deck. And that's how you do it. You don't need a warm intro. You don't have to have, gone to certain schools necessarily. And that's, to me, the future of how do we change inequity? I think one of the biggest things is we get more people solving for problems that they've experienced versus people trying to come in and either solve for problems to your point that like aren't actually that big of problems, but it's like a sexy pitch deck, or people that are trying to solve problems in the wrong way out of like what is good intentions, but a savior mentality. And when you think about, you know, just the wealth that comes out of the success stories of venture capital, it's like, how do we get more people in the door? And how many ideas are left on the table because nobody can get in that front door? And
I'm convinced that we have this latent entrepreneurial energy that's locked behind, you know, computers or Target checkout stands or at home with kids, because there aren't enough women saying like, why not me? Why can't I be the one to bring this idea to life? And part of it is access to capital, of course, right? You know, you think you need $250,000 to start your business. And fortunately, that's not true anymore. There's so many third-party technologies and light code versions of getting our products into the world. I'm sure if you were starting Shine right now, you know, there's so many different things you could do that would have expedited and taken a lot of the upfront cost off. So helping educate women about those resources, I think, is crucial to being able to take that step. But, you know, access to networks and knowledge are the other two pieces. And so I think, you know, whether you're a local funding ecosystem or you're an entrepreneur that wants to like kind of reach out nationally to other women, I think it's our responsibility to open the door and reach back and bring other women through it with us, and being mindful of not just inviting women that look like us, but women that don't look like us to come through. And then the other piece of it is, I think we need to make sure that as a country, we're doing a better job of funding early stage consumer businesses, because as you said, people solve problems that they personally understand really well. And first time founders, that is what they do. But first time founders, they may have succeeded or they may not, right? But if we can get them through that like life cycle and meet angel investors, meet VCs, then the chances of their second company being either, you know, an easier to fund B2B SaaS company is higher, or they'll be much better at that second company and more likely to bring it to a valuation that provides returns for them and for their investors.
And sets that example of like we need, because there's, you know, there's who gets the pre-seed money, which is just getting the pre-seed money, or seed money is huge. But it's like 50% of companies get to the 5-year milestone. You know, of those 50%, to your point, start doing the math, like the 2%, you know, or so of women. And then, you know, as an Asian American woman, there's more representation within women than Black or Latinx. But Mara was, I think, maybe the 17th or 18th Black woman in the US to raise more than $1 million in VC funding. Vanity Fair did a really powerful piece on it. And I think it's where, like you were saying, to be inclusive, you have to be specific. Like if we're going to talk about what the problems are and what the opportunities are in the space for more representation, we have to be specific about where we need more representation. And so women overall need more representation, but particularly Black and Latinx founders.
Yeah, it's crazy. Chicago, we have 2 Latinas that have raised over $1 million, and I'm one of them. And I did it quite a while ago. And so it's just, you know, we're a big city with a pretty strong funding ecosystem. And most people don't realize this, but Chicago is actually a third Black, a third Latinx, and a third white. And so we are under indexing by such a huge margin when you think about our overall distribution of race. So
I have a question for you, which is also like, and I think Mara probably had the same feeling too, where it's like, that's such a, like, do you feel this mix of like, that's such pride in terms of what you're representing, but then like, why are there only 2 of us that are like getting that, you know, just the frustration? What do you think, like that identity, being a woman of color, being a mother, has impacted like how you talk to yourself every day? Or like risk is such a big part of being a founder. And I know that's something I struggle with, is it's taken me a very long time to say like, just, you have to get comfortable with like the risk, because I think as women of color, we have less room for failure. As women, we have less room for failure. And that's something you carry every single day. So how's your identity kind of impacted the journey?
It's such a great question. And I would love your thoughts on it too, because especially as like a first generation college student for your family, or a first generation immigrant, right? You know, there is a lot of pressure, and the opportunity costs of entrepreneurship are actually that much higher, because the uncertainty and the risk of failure, there's no safety net within your kind of family wealth, right? Right. And so if you fail, you could really take your family under. Especially anyone that's invested in you along the way, which is why I didn't do any friends and family rounds of funding for my companies, because I just didn't have it within my family. Right. And, you know, I recognize that I present as white, and I did go to Yale. And so I know that I have the privilege of sharing the pedigree, although I'm a woman, that's still more familiar for a lot of VCs and angels. And and with that comes a different level of responsibility, I think, to give back and to bring my peers that are, did not go to an Ivy League school or, don't have a CS degree from, Stanford, which I also don't have, but that, like that is a big driver for me. And candidly, like post George Floyd last year, I just felt like as a founder who's had all these opportunities in Chicago, I, went through Techstars, I bootstrapped for a long time. I raised money from Nationwide Insurance as a strategic investor. I raised venture debt. I did an equity crowdfunding campaign on Republic. I was on Shark Tank. Like I've had all these experiences.
Yeah.
I was
which
like,
is amazing.
Things I'm not trying to brag. I'm more just saying like, I need to do something with this because my company, is failing because of COVID. And I think my long answer to your question is that there is a tremendous amount of like stress around needing to succeed when you're one of two Latinas that have raised $1 million in your city, and the pressure to represent is really high. And so the fear of failure / the kind of reputation piece of this is definitely something that I struggle with as a woman founder in Chicago. And I think I'm so lucky to have found, and partnered with P33 to build TechRise, because I feel like that experience is not for nothing, right? That I can now use it and share it and elevate other founders in a way that they probably didn't have access to before. So, what about you?
That's really powerful. And I think that the opportunity cost is so real.
Jumping into a business with your friend from work is like the riskiest.
Right. Oh my gosh. I know. And there's some interesting stats where I think it's like, if it's just a friend, the stats are low. If it's a coworker and a friendship, that's a very strong dynamic. But Mara and I are really, we say it's like we've done more work together than like relationship. We're both married, and it's like, but it's a partnership, and there's so many different stages to what we've done. And I think the thing that was really hard for us in our first year was unlearning a lot of, we came out of a fairly toxic culture in the place that we met, a very toxic culture. And it's part of why we connected, because we were the only senior women of color on the management team. And there was just, there's like, there's all the work that you do on yourself and with yourself, but then there's how you go and interact with the world and how the world interacts with you. And so that was something that we both really struggled with at our old company, and we're lucky to find each other. It's been really powerful for both Mara and I to be more open with our experience and our journey. And there's the experience that we share as two women of color, and then there's the individual experience. Mara's a Black woman, and everything that means in America. And then there's myself, as I'm 4th generation Japanese American, so I'm physically, I'm very Asian, but I don't have as much of, because I'm 4th generation, it's like culturally, there's things that I wish I had a bigger part of my Japanese culture. And so when we first started, we from the beginning were saying, wellness and just talking about what you struggle with needs to be a lot more accessible. And so from the beginning, we put inclusion and representation at the forefront of the company. We didn't necessarily have an initiative, but it's like, if we can get more women of color in leadership positions, our team is 80% BIPOC. And that just happens because it's just part of our own experience. And it's when you go to a website and you see people that, represent more of what all of America looks like, that's going to attract a more diverse set of people. And so from the beginning, we've said this is really important. And what we want to do is figure out how to use our platform where we're talking about mental health themes, but we're very explicit that has to intersect with what's happening in the world. So why we've stood out, and for example, Apple, one of the big reasons why they gave us that award is because we launched a specific meditations for Black well-being after the murder of George Floyd and in the fight for racial justice. We recently just did a similar set of meditations for AAPI, knowing that there's so much happening in our community right now that is very scary. And there's just a lot of conversations that are happening for the first time around like identity and mental health. And all that to say, I think when we first started, the mistake that we made is, while it was always part of the foundation, we kind of took ourselves out of it. We said, Shine should be the book, not the movie. We want you to imagine Shine however you want it to be. But we realized that was kind of doing a disservice. And so in this last year, we've put ourselves on the paywall. We launched an About Us page, which is so basic, but like just telling our story. It's like, look, we started this because we were overlooked. Like whether it was our body sizes, our past trauma, our dynamics growing up in our families, like we just felt kind of otherized in the way that like wellness was being sold. And that, I mean, that like doubled conversion, just so many testimonials from our community being like, I feel seen. I feel seen for the first time in the meditation space that has been largely appropriated in a lot of ways by like kind of a homogenous, you know, white male culture or white culture. And that I think has been a really powerful experience for us this last year, is to just say like, let's just be more open about who we are, what we've struggled with, and trust that like we're doing it with a community that has our back because they're joining us to take a different approach. And it's helping us grow. It's helping us grow in our identity. But that's a lot easier to do in our community than it was maybe in the investor community starting out. You know, like I think there's a lot more awareness now in the VC space because of this last year and the conversations around race that we're having, you know, for a lot of people the first time, you know. But when we first started, there was a lot of like, oh, are you a not-for-profit? Because we come from the not-for-profit world, and because we're both, I think, kind women, and for some reason that just means charity for people. Doesn't the idea that can't be connected to a really successful business is a very big problem, I think, in our company's like a version of alpha leadership. And I think because, you know, what we struggled with a little bit was this is again, not all VCs. We're really lucky. We have great investors that are like very partner focused. A lot are, you know, from marginalized communities. But there was definitely some more of the antiquated traditional VCs that we met that it's like, oh, I had my daughter check out Shine. I don't know if she likes it. And it's like, well, I don't know if your daughter is our target. And it's like, if you're a woman, they want to relate to you through their wife, the secretary, or their daughter. And if you can't relate, if you don't look like any of that, it's like, well, where do I put you? You can't just be a potential like entrepreneur. And obviously that's like oversimplifying stuff, but that's definitely like some of the interactions we had. And so I think it's interesting. I think if we were to go out and raise now, I like to think it would be different. I think there's an increased awareness around why our approach matters, both from a business and impact perspective, but there's still a lot of change that needs to happen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. A few years ago when I was raising for Parachute, I was talking to an investor who came highly recommended, was on a friend's cap table. And he said to me, is it really that big of a problem? My wife figured it out. And I was like so offended for his wife and for me and my business. But I was also thinking to myself, like, you know, yes, your wife and secretary also booked your dinner reservations and bought your plane tickets before, but you still funded the white men that solved that problem for them. So why don't you fund
so true
the woman who's building the business that's now going to save, you know, your wife and your family hours of time and lots of money
oh gosh.
And so it's moments like that where you're like, oh, we have so far to go still. And then you also kind of run into it with women investors, you know, if they haven't, like the social capital that women have within their firms, depending on the firm, can be pretty low because they haven't had a track record yet, right? So many of them are early in their careers. And so to stick their neck out for a ultra female business is actually quite hard for many of them, which is why you see so many of them in like crypto and B2B and SaaS and, you know, future of work, because it's an easier place for them to cut their teeth and have some big wins early on. And I think that, you know, we just need more consumer focused funds with diverse decision makers. And and I don't want to say, I mean, I've been supported and I'm so grateful for the VCs that have come to the table and said, yes, we believe in you and this is a problem we're solving. But you know, it took so many no's. And as women, especially if you're, you know, a high achieving woman, like type A personality, that comfort with rejection it's a very painful muscle to develop and so foreign to how we live our lives. Right. And so I do think that that's one of the areas where we as women kind of need to step up and like this problem isn't going to get solved for us by men, right? And it's not going to get solved for us by exclusively women either. And so if we want to increase, you know, or narrow the wealth gap and narrow the pay gap, and if we want to have more representation by women, we need to do the work ourselves too, to like get more comfortable with failure, with imposter syndrome, with all the things that I think hold us back.
Yes. Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. And to that point of just thinking about getting more comfortable with some of those daily challenges of imposter syndrome or negative self-talk or lack of self-compassion, like how do you feel like that journey has changed for you? Like do you feel like there's been progress and, you know, like, okay, I trust myself. Like, how has that evolved for you in terms of your relationship with yourself and confidence in the game?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I'm laughing at myself trying to answer it, because I think in many ways I treated that as like whack-a-mole. Like I kind of solved it at work, but then it would like flare up at home really bad because I wasn't like using the same toolkit to solve the problem.
Yes. Oh, that's very relatable.
Not so much imposter syndrome at home, but like, self-doubt,
Right.
not giving your kind of person across the table the benefit of the doubt in conversations. And so, a couple of things happened for me that really changed things. So one, Give Forward, hiring the CEO and recognizing like the lack of confidence in myself was a combination of just that, but also a lack of leadership training. I'd never really had a long-term boss, and I'd never been a manager before. And suddenly I had 45 people under me, and I just didn't know how to reconcile my vision for the company with my obligations as a coach, mentor, and leader. And so I did invest in an executive coach that was really helpful for me in identifying some of my own blind spots as a leader. And so that, as painful as that journey was to lose that company and the potential wealth that could have gone with it, I gained so much so early in my career because I stepped away and did that forced reflection. But then fast forward, and I think I still struggled with some other things. So I actually started seeing a founder therapist, which I don't know if they exist all over the country, but I very much recommend women finding a therapist that like is familiar with the business line that you're in. Because it's so much easier to get to the heart of like what's bothering you in both your personal and professional life. So I would say like that's where I made a lot of progress. And then I'm also a huge Wayne Dyer fan. So when I go for walks and, I'm like reading, or listening to, but I really love listening on Audible, and it just kind of reminds you to think about yourself and like in the context of the world. And like this, like whatever this drama is not that big. And what's the worst thing that can happen? Usually it's not as bad as you think. So I don't do enough meditating, but I do some Wayne Dyer walking. So
I feel like walking is such a powerful meditation too, but I think walking is one of the most powerful tools we have if you're able to do it. A founder therapist is really smart.
Absolutely. I mean, I hope that someone's listening and starts a business that spins these off like crazy, because we need more of them. But I was actually going to switch gears and ask you about, having a female co-founder. I'm curious, how that journey has been. You said you were friends already, which helps a lot, but, in some ways, I think that the negative self-talk can be amplified when two women are together and experiencing the same kind of frustration or disappointment. I'm curious, like how it's been a benefit, and then how you've maybe had to overcome some of the challenges of two women co-founders.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question, because I love the curiosity around it, because, when we first started, we got a lot of curiosity in terms of like belief and interest in this as like one form of leadership, because when we first started, another example of some of the like toxic masculinity stuff that we had to deal with is like, but who will win? Like, who will kill each other? Like, there was a lot of, I think some of that was maybe where they've seen it gone wrong, but there was just no benefit of the doubt of like, this is a version that works for us. And it's like, when you think about what the product is, it all sort of makes sense. So I'm very grateful that with time, as you know, and success in terms of just time, like sticking around and, surviving, there's so much more now interest in how we're doing it versus like doubt, which has just been nice. Because what we've said from the beginning is that like Mara and I are very different people. A similar sense of humor, a lot of resilience, a lot of the same values, and you have to have that. But even when we look at like communication styles, like communication types, different colors, there's like, she's more red, she's better at like decision making, and like she's just, I admire so much about her ability to like take complex things and simplify them into like what's most actionable. I'm more of like a yellow green kind of collaborate. I want to get everybody's opinion and then like talk about it and then qualify it a little bit and then like try to move forward together. And that is great for like bringing, people together, but without Mara's very like decision driven definitiveness that I find, and conviction that I find so attractive. It's like, just, it wouldn't work, just my style alone. But I think actually, there's these interesting conversations around something that's been harder in COVID is with isolation is like, when you're left alone with your thoughts, they can kind of amplify, because often how we work through things, and this is true with like stigma around mental health, the way that you reduce stigma around mental health is repetition and awareness. So it's like talking about things and breaking the spiral of silence around what we struggle with. And I have found my relationship with Mara, and I think some of that might just be having a co-founder, having a female co-founder, and then there's just things that are very specific to our relationship. She will help. We both have our times, right? The times where we're down or doubting ourselves, and we're able to kind of pull each other up. And the things that we struggle with are sort of different, and so we can help each other see ourselves a little bit more. And that reassurance and that like feeling not alone, having that friendship has been so key for us. Yeah. When we raised our first round in 2016, I mean, part of it was that I wasn't in the venture world, so it was all unfamiliar to me, but it was very hard to find people that looked like us, as well as diversity of personality. Like, what were the personality types that represent what it means to be like a successful entrepreneur, and all the like kind of loaded history that typically comes with. And when I think about meeting someone like you, like that, all of these seemingly like, okay, day-to-day interactions, the more that network grows, the more that we get PR coverage, and a young woman reads about us and hears your story of, being born in Costa Rica, to going to Yale, to my story of being Asian American and, going to community colleges. There's going to be someone that relates to that experience and is going to think for the first time, like, oh, I could do that too.
Yeah. I just had a thought too, while you were talking, that I realized, something that has fundamentally changed too is the flexibility of what we're doing right now, right? Which is that normally you and I would be on a panel together, like maybe because we both are part of the same portfolio, right, of a coastal VC, but not like this. And so I think that one really great outcome of COVID and what's happened is the fact that there is the flexibility to do this remote work that is not going to go away. And so it does open up opportunities for women for fractional work, doing their job in a way that's more conducive to the life that they want to live. And I also think it opens up, the freelancer is no longer like the struggling, weaving together hours, but is now often a highly compensated, part-time employee of a company, whether it's a startup or not. And so there's so much opportunity for women to learn in that environment and think of new ways to use and refine their skills. And so I do think for the women that are already in the workforce, that this new normal is actually going to be a long-term advantage.
I totally agree. Like being able to have your full self too, like, for me, for one of the reasons we moved home is like being closer to family. And that's really important. I want to feel like I can be closer to family and parents with some health issues, and also run a business. Oh, the last thing that I was thinking about too is the power of language. When you look at, everything from the Me Too movement to the fight for racial justice to, I think, unfortunately, what came out of, a lot of issues with the Trump administration was America getting better dialogue for talking about what's not okay. And for example, we did a daily shine on representation burnout, and that's the feeling of exhaustion from being the only person of a certain identity in a room. And so whether that's, ends up with you being tokenized or meant to speak to a monolith, that term was something that I think 5 or 6 years ago, people wouldn't have gotten, broad kind of everybody sort of wouldn't have gotten. I think there's so much language now for women to speak to why something's not okay, why something is problematic, or why something is a result of like toxic masculinity. And we are in an era of accountability for companies, for people in positions of power to be good actors. And there's more channels to call out bad actors. And I think the language, particularly for women, to, who we've been socialized as a culture to always make people comfortable. I think for the first time, I'm realizing like, that's not my job. My job is to be kind. My job is to be direct. And my job is a number of things, but right now it's to build a business. And so if something's not okay, I feel more comfortable speaking to that, why it's not okay. I have more education than I did 5 years ago. And I think that's one of the things that makes me most hopeful for the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we did kind of brush over the Me Too movement, and it was such a huge decade in both of our careers, just kind of
oh my gosh,
estimating where we are age-wise. And of course,
yes,
I'm sure you have your own stories, and I definitely have mine. But that is another level of optimism that I have, that what was
Yes.
once kind of okay and quiet or shameful experiences is no longer okay. And we have allies across the board, right?
Yes.
In other men, in other women, to make sure that, or as much as possible, that what
Yes.
was once normal is not allowed behavior anymore. And, you know,
And how
fundraising
many women maybe stepped out of the game because of a bad experience that I hope will be decreased.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this was a really amazing conversation.
I
hope I get to meet you in person
I was
sometime.
thinking the same thing. I was thinking the same thing. And just congrats on everything you built. I was like, Desiree is so smart. You are so smart and talented. And it's just been a joy to talk to you, and just a helpful practice of like being so in it all the time, just taking a step back and reflecting on this last year. So thanks for the conversation.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this Kauffman Foundation podcast. For more stories on growing an inclusive economy, please visit us at emkf.org/currents. The Uncommon Conversation series brings two people together to discuss personal perspectives and fresh opinions on topics related to the Kauffman Foundation's work. The perspectives of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of the Kauffman Foundation, but are presented here to celebrate uncommon voices and civil discourse to move conversations forward.